the latest episode of 305 Vox Populi here in the studio. And I'm Mayor Manny Cid, your host. This is our final episode for this season as we go on Christmas break. But we leave off with an incredible bang. We have with us today Dr. Michael Alessandri, the Executive Director for the CARD Center. The NSU CARD Center was a center for autism and related disabilities. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great. Always good to be with you, my friend.
Appreciate you having on. So something that we kick off our episodes with all the time, it's your why. But I want to touch upon that, expand upon that a little bit further, because we've had a couple folks recently who've talked about you, and the way that folks talk about you is truly amazing. Like we had Eric Frezin on here, and he shared a story of how you and him worked together to change the funding mechanism for autism funding in the state of Florida. We recently went on a tour of Goodwill. We're in this meeting with the CEO and everybody, and your name comes up, and they're like, man, it's the godfather of services for kids with autism and related disabilities. So my question is, to kick it off, what's your why? When did you decide to say, you know what, I am going to be the voice for some of those folks whose voices never get heard? Because I think we all realize sometimes that unfortunately in public policy, all the policy goes towards people that participate, people that vote. That's why seniors, regardless if they lived here in our country or not, there's seniors that show up here last week and they get free housing, free healthcare, free food, free everything, you name it, because they voted mass. But families with kids with disabilities, adults with disabilities, really don't participate in mass in politics. So you don't see those funds going in that direction. But what was that why for you? When did you decide this is going to be my passion? This is what I'm going to focus on for the rest of my life.
I love that question. I've answered it, I think, a bunch of times over the years, but I love talking about it because I think it is, and I experience this every year because I teach students at the University of Miami, but I think it's super inspiring for young people to hear those kind of stories of how you were inspired to do the work and to follow your passions. But I also want to say that I think my grandfathers would be very proud that anyone calls me a godfather. my good old Italian grandpas would love that. But no, I think my story started in, believe it or not, 1981. I graduated high school. I was a typical kind of nerdy kid, valedictorian, did well in all my classes, was kind of a high achiever, and knew I was going to go on and do something, but I had really no passion, no inspiration. I was just planning to go to school and just keep getting good grades without any real clear sense of purpose. So my parents insisted that summer that I go and do something meaningful with my life before I went off to college. So, just because I really never worked either. I was one of those kids who was lucky enough not to have to go to work during high school. And I went one day with a friend of mine to a summer camp where she was working, and it was a summer camp for children with developmental disabilities. And on the very first day, the director said, you'll probably not come back. So we're just going to allow you to spend the day with one child. And you'll be his shadow, his paraprofessional for the day. And it was a little boy named Marlon, little African-American boy, had autism. First time I'd ever heard of autism. And I spent the day with Marlon, and it was the most exhilarating day I'd ever spent in my 17 years of life. I felt so, intellectually stimulated by the social, emotional experience that I was having with a child who was not social and who didn't seem to be connected emotionally or engaged with me in any way. But yet I felt a real closeness with him, and I felt something from him as well. And I went home that day, and I actually told my parents that I knew what I was going to do for the rest of my life. It was that monumental and emotional experience for me to share the day with this boy. I had never felt the level of kind of acceptance and truth that I felt in that day with Marlon. He was so pure and just such a wonderful presence to be around. I thought I needed that in my life every single day for the rest of my life. So fast forward 42 years where we are today, and I've never done anything else. I immersed myself completely in the world of autism from the age of 17, studied autism, did research on autism, went to graduate school to study autism, got my first professor job where I focused on autism, and continued to work in the world of autism and developmental disabilities. And I think, I always describe it as like a lightning bolt to my heart. Like it felt like this experience with this boy opened up my heart. Like I felt like I understood how to give and get love for the first time as a human being. And it's been that way ever since. I've never looked back. I'm blessed every single day to be able to do this work.
So the journey from meeting Marlon at 17 to CARD.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that path and how did that happen?
Yeah, it's a bit of a journey. I decided in college that I think the plan was always in my family that I would be the doctor, right? In the family, like someone gets anointed, you'll be the doctor. And I think the impression was that I would be the medical doctor. But when I got to school, when I got to college, I loved math, I loved science, I loved all of that, but I didn't feel satisfied by any of them because I kept thinking about Marlon. I kept thinking about all the kids that I would work with every summer after I met Marlon. And at some point, I discovered psychology. And I discovered this professor, his name was Dr. Rue Cromwell. He was kind of like the godfather of schizophrenia research at the time. And he took me under his wing and I began to study schizophrenia. But as we were doing the research on schizophrenia, I kept trying to associate it back to what I would do if I were to study autism from a psychological perspective. So I went to graduate school where I studied autism extensively, exclusively. And then I became a professor. My very first job was a professor at a program at a school called San Jose State University in California. Concurrently, while I was a professor at San Jose State, I was also helping to run the autism clinic at Stanford University in the medical school. So it happened one summer, about May or June, I think it was, maybe July actually, in 1994. I went to an international meeting for autism. It was the Autism Society meeting. And I went to a show. It was the Siegfried and Roy show. I don't know if you know those guys. The dudes with the tigers.
I went when I was a little kid.
Yeah,
my mom took me to one.
It's insane. So I'm like living in California, but I'm in Las Vegas at this conference. I'm at a show that's not even at the same hotel as the conference. And sitting across from me is this woman, Diane Adrian, who had just opened up the Center for Autism-Related Disabilities at the University of Miami. That was in 93, and I met her in 94. And I just started talking to her, and I said, listen, I'm a professor, I'm in autism also. If there's ever an opportunity in Miami, because I was having these flashes of South Beach and life in Miami, and I thought I could really live there. And a couple of years later, we connected again, and she said, we just got some money. And they had very little money. I think they offered me like $30,000 for 80% effort, and I could keep my job in California. So I was commuting 3 weeks here, 1 week there. I took the job, and eventually I became the executive director. So I joined in 1996, became the executive director probably in 97 or 8, or director and then executive director, and I've been there ever since. So it was just a little bit of a circuitous path, but every part of my career has always been autism-centric.
So from 97 to 2023, how many families did you start servicing in 97? How many families do you service today?
So in 97, we probably had a few hundred at the end of the year. And then just this past year, we hit over 16,500.
16,500?
16,500. We're almost at 17,000, I think, right now. 17,000 active families being served by our CARD. Because CARD is a network of 7 universities around the state, all regionalized, but ours serves just Broward-Dade and Monroe. And in that Broward-Dade Monroe region, 17,000 families, plus all the teachers, all the businesses, all the municipalities, everybody else who intersects their life with a person with autism.
So if, just say the CARD Center back then in 93 or 97 when you started, if you all didn't exist, if the funding that you've all changed throughout the years, that didn't exist, what would have happened to these families?
Well, they wouldn't get the support that they needed. I mean, the thing that the CARD Center, for people who are listening and watching don't know, the CARD Centers actually are kind of the network of support they're the lifeline really for families. We're the people they come to figure out how to get a diagnosis, where to get a diagnosis, who to see for treatment, what types of treatment you should get. We help them with their schools. We help them with their family issues. We help them as their children develop throughout the course of life. So babies become children, children become teens, teens become adults, adults become older. And autism exists across the lifespan. And so CARD is the through thread for all of those families across their entire child's life, because other systems of care, kids get dropped off at different ages, right? They picked up and dropped off. And so the other thing I'll say is that there's nothing even remotely like the CARD network in any other state in the country, and nothing like it anywhere in the world. And I've traveled all over the world. I can tell you with some self-assurance that we are uniquely positioned and remarkably effective and cost-effective, for that matter. Great return on investment for the state, because we serve every family. No one pays anything for the services they get from CARD. We're funded by the government through the Department of Education, but also through private fundraising. So it's a low-cost, high-impact kind of initiative. But families would be lost. They'd have to really fight fight alone in this journey to figure out the next best steps. What we love about what we do is because we don't charge anything. Families can rely on us to be completely objective about what we think their children need, what would be in the best interest of their child's long-term outcome. And I think that's a beautiful gift. Florida should be, I tell legislators this all the time, like, dudes, you don't even know how special this program is. Like it's the most remarkable thing that I think, in some ways, that we've done in the state of Florida ever for people with developmental disabilities, particularly autism. And I think it should grow. It should continue to grow.
So, going back to when you were 17 years old, from that day meeting Marlon,
yeah,
and changing your life to today. I know you just had a big birthday recently, all these years. Can I say how many?
You can say it, yeah.
So today, 60 years old, right? From meeting Marlon to servicing almost 17,000 families. Looking back where you're at today to that chance meeting where God put that in your path, and how does that feel? Just reminiscing back throughout all these years from just that moment that changed your life. Now you're changing the lives of 17,000 families.
I mean, I tell people all the time that my work is my life, and my work gave me my life. And now that there's no daylight between work and personal life for me, because all the families are my family. They're my friends. They're the people I spend my social time with. They're the people I travel with, people I love every day. So for me, it's everything. It's my entire life. I mean, I think, like I said before, I think I learned how to love people through my exposure to people with autism. I was not a kid who grew up. I grew up well, and I grew up with loving family, but I don't know that I ever felt, unconditionally loved, honestly, to be very frank. And to get that through your work, right? And so it became so motivating for me to just give so much of my love to the kids and their families in this community. Like when I came to CARD, I used to tell my staff all the time, we're not building an autism center. We're building a community. And that community needs us, but we also need that community. Like I run a support group for mothers and for fathers, and I tell them all the time, I think this group is for me more than it is for you, because they give me so much back. So for me, it's just about living your work life in a way that feeds your heart. And then it's just your life. It's not your work life. It's just your life. And I'm just, I feel blessed every single day that I discovered Marlon. I mean, I wonder what would have happened. Who would I have been? What would I have been like? Like, what would my soul be like? Would it be darker? Would it be more cynical? I mean, I'm not dark or cynical or any of those things. I'm just, and you've said some things that people have said about me, and I know that 9.9 times out of 10, you're going to hear the same thing, because I give so much love to this community, and because I get it back in spades. It's unbelievable.
No, and
it's
Doc,
a blessing.
That's really. By the way, have you ever tried to follow up where Marlon?
I know something about Marlon. Yeah. No, I haven't seen him, but I do know something. Interestingly enough, I gave a talk in New York years ago in Manhattan. And I told my story, the origination story of Dr. Alessandri. And people in the audience came up to me and like, we know him, and we know where he is. And so it was interesting. And I had never made that connection. I never closed the loop. But one day.
That's powerful. And Doc Alessandri is right. I mean, the love that he has for our community is truly amazing. So typically, folks in positions like him, when you call them, they send you a text back like, no, deal with my secretary. Doc Alessandri, if I call him about a family in our community, if I call him, he picks up right away. He's like, hey, how can I help? Hey, this person, that person, let's make it happen. And I think it goes back to that love. So I think the big lesson there for you all, for especially all the young kids, for all the business owners out there, you got to love what you do. You got to have that passion, because that changes your perspective on how you help people. So we're going to hand it off to the students. I know you all have some questions lined up. I see Laz back there with his hand up. Then we'll go to Albert. Start off with Laz, then Albert, and we'll go around.
Let me just say one thing, though, because what you just said about me is exactly the same thing about you. Like, you live your work life the same way you live your life. And that's why I really love and respect you, because you were the first person in Miami Lakes who sought us out when we opened our office here. And you had no reason to. And I've seen that every day since that I've known you. You're just a good-hearted, loving guy. And
Appreciate that.
all right, now I'm ready.
It's about the energy, right? You put out good energy.
It's
and
all
you
energy.
Surround yourself with good people.
Do you ever come across somebody in like a social setting, whether it be at the groceries or at a restaurant, and say to yourself, yeah, that guy has it, you know?
Well, I mean, I can't lie. Yes, probably I do that. We're trained to identify autism in all of its forms, and it has many, many forms. So I do see individuals with autism. Maybe they're diagnosed, maybe they're not. Often in the community, I don't act on that. I don't intrude in people's personal space if they don't already know me. But if someone were to ask me to assist in a situation where I suspected the person in that situation might have autism, I might try to help the family on that journey.
What do you think among the cases that aren't so like obvious? What do you think are some identifiable characteristics of?
Well, what I always tell people is autism is not like a quantitative, and this is maybe too technical, it's not a quantitative disorder, meaning it's not someone has more or less of something. It's just a qualitative disorder. It's something that's different. People socialize differently, they communicate differently, they understand the world a little bit differently, they emote and understand emotions differently. So I try to think of it more as difference than disability, and typically those differences are in the areas of like socialization and communication, language. So those are the things that I would encourage you. That doesn't mean that's not a disability. People still do struggle when they have autism in some forms of it. So I think it's important that we don't just dismiss it as a difference, because there is still disability that requires intervention. But when I'm just trying to conceptualize it broadly for people, particularly young people, who I'm trying to train to understand and accept people with differences, we do try to focus on the different presentations of just humanity, different personalities.
Albert?
Right, so my question is the name of your organization CARD, does it make any sense other than the initials of the organization, or is it just?
It's just CARD, Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, or as we like to say in the office, tarjeta. We joke around about CARD in our office, but no, it just stands for the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities. And I'm glad you mentioned the name, because the RD in CARD is very important to us as well. Like people, we are mostly a center for children and adults with autism, but we never dismiss the other individuals who have what we call the related disabilities. And in our center, those related disabilities are children who have either vision or hearing loss with another disability. It's a very specifically defined related disability. And also children and adults who are deaf and blind. So that's a population that we serve as well. But because autism is the bulk of who we serve, sometimes people forget that this is CARD, not just CA, Center for Autism. And that's an important part of our name, I think, and our identity.
Brett?
So, obviously leading up, you've had a lot of success in your career. So, what has been so far your biggest takeaway?
In terms of success?
Yes. Well, at least in terms of, because obviously you've had your really great days, you've had your highs, your lows, you've been through it all. So what has been, I guess, your biggest takeaway thus far in your...
The biggest takeaway, I think, and I referenced it a bit earlier, and I think the biggest lesson is that when you have a disability, and particularly a developmental disability, and you're a family, the most important thing that you need is to feel connected to a bigger community. It can be very isolating to have a disability, and it's difficult to find friends, it's difficult to find supportive families, sometimes it's very difficult to find services, and so the disconnect and the isolation is really kind of prominent in people's lives. So we've spent a lot of time building the community, and Mayor Cid over here knows, there are a lot of people who have created their own communities in different municipalities, in different parts of the community that we live in. But community is everything. Communities where you find people who understand you, where you find the support that you need, where you find the information resources that you need, and where you feel loved, appreciated, understood, and accepted. Because a lot of our families do feel really kind of marginalized, I think, because their children don't always fit in. So we've worked really hard to try to create community. And for me, I think that's been the biggest takeaway, that I can be the smartest guy in the room, or the best autism doctor, or someone who has all the evidence behind the interventions I'm recommending. But if all of that's happening also in isolation, you're not really helping the families. You have to help them build their network of support, build their tribe, if you will. Good question.
Yes, sir.
So, it's great to have you on the podcast. I wanted to ask. You've had so much success, and you've made such a great impact in the community when it comes to autism. I really want to know how are you to, because you elaborated a lot in terms of helping out with the community. I wanted to ask, how are you able to create community when it comes to serving parents and their children?
For me, it's always started with just being someone people can count on. Right? Being available, being present, being accessible, not passing people off to other people, letting the people know that you are, not that you're the center of all the good things that may come, but that you care enough to be connected in a way that produces meaningful change for those families. So when I do that, and I model that for my team, and I model that for our families, and I model that from our legislators and our community leaders, then suddenly people feel a little bit more inspired to make those connections and to maintain those connections. So I think you do it all by, example. And as the mayor said before, I'm almost everybody in this town has my cell phone number. I'm not shy. I'm not disconnected. My phone's on 24/7. It's not unsurprising to get a text from me, a response to an email or a text at 3 a.m. I tell parents if they're in crisis, please just reach out. I'm totally available always. And once you establish that credibility, once you establish that people can trust that you're not just selling them something, right, a line, you're really going to deliver on your promise to care and love and be part of their family. That's the other part of it. I tell my students all the time, because sometimes as students, professors teach you that there's a line between your professional life and your personal life, and you can never cross that line. Your clients are your clients, and your friends are your friends. But what I tell my team is that we have to blur that line. Like, in order to really help our families, we have to be part of the family. We have to care just as much as everyone in the family about our clients if we're actually going to help them create community and be, the vehicle through which they feel fully optimized and fully just full lives for their family, that they feel like they're part of something really bigger and special. Thank you.
We still got a couple more questions, so we got one there. We'll go back to Laz after that.
What's a struggle that comes with working in this community? Because I know working with this type of people.
The struggles are real. Probably one of the reasons I don't sleep, and I'm a terrible sleeper, and maybe I get 2 or 3 hours a night on a good night if I'm lucky, which is not, I don't recommend that, by the way. But the struggles are real. I spend a lot of nights just awake worrying about our families, worrying about the future, worrying about the families that haven't found us yet. There are many, many more families that haven't found the card center yet than the ones that have found it. So I worry about them. What are the barriers for those people in accessing care, accessing resources, knowing about me and my work? And how do I get over that? How do I help them get over that? I'm also worried about just society in general right now. I have a lot of worries about, there's a tendency now to marginalize people in ways that I think are not really helpful. And I think people with disabilities often get marginalized, pretty easily by others. And I worry that the trend that I'm seeing is not necessarily one that's about inclusion and acceptance. And I understand that there are complex, discussions to be had about things like that. But when it comes to people with disabilities, they don't often have a voice in the conversation. It's not as easy for them to be part of the conversation, to be part of the pathway forward. And so sometimes it's easier to talk about other groups and marginalize those with disabilities. Even in broad corporate, diversity kinds of efforts, sometimes people forget about disability. And so that worries me. I think making sure our schools have sufficient resources so that kids get the education they need when they have a disability, making sure we have enough providers for the different therapies that are required. We require a lot of our kids with autism get 25 to 40 hours a week of therapy, but we don't have enough therapists in Florida to be able to provide that. And then you have the financial aspects of caring for a person with disabilities. Families go broke. Sometimes parents give up their careers because it doesn't make sense for both parents to work, and then all of that, and then the resources, the equations don't work out necessarily, the finances. So sometimes families divorce so that they can access, benefits better, government benefits. So there's just a lot of struggles, I think. For me, the most important thing is acceptance, building a community of love and acceptance and true nurturing and care. And then from that, I think all good things will come. But we have to also change policies. We have to really be working with our legislators so that they understand what families actually need at home, or when their kids are, outside of the home, like in a public school or in a therapy situation. So I will say we have CARD is funded by the Florida legislature through the Department of Education, and always has been, and we have great support on both sides of the aisle in Tallahassee, and I've always been grateful for that. And I'm very strategically non-political. I'm no party affiliation. I'm just the guy I'm a one-issue guy. All I care about is people with autism and disabilities. Whatever issues I have personally, I can handle those. I don't need to be political about that. So I think what I'll say is that we just have to do a better job making sure that legislators really understand what it means to walk in the shoes of these families. Because it's one thing to look at a family with a disability and assume you understand what they need, but to really understand day to day the ins and outs of caring for a loved one with a disability is much more complex. It's really complicated. And families really do struggle. Even with the community, even with support, even with people like me in their lives, it's still a long and difficult journey.
Good question for sure.
So what tends to happen to aging and maybe like even elderly people with disabilities and autism? Because we see lots of media coverage of children, but it kind of tapers off after like the 20s hit, and a lot of the times they don't have like caretakers. So what tends to happen in those cases?
It's a great question. We always say as children with autism become adults with autism, and adults with autism become elderly people with autism. So it is important that we think about the lifespan when we're developing systems of care. We don't have a very good system of care once individuals become adults. There are very few job opportunities. There are very few healthcare providers that will continue to see the children after the age of 18. Very difficult to find post-secondary educational options. And then there's virtually no geriatric care for adults as they become older and maybe impaired in some way because of their aging. So I think it's challenging. I mean, one of the big horizons, I think, where opportunities exist in terms of the future is looking at the system of care for people with autism as they age. So just for an example, we're building right now, I'm on the board of a program called Casa Familia, an organization called Casa Familia Inc. We're going to be breaking ground on December 19th in Kendall, the first Miami-Dade-based affordable housing community for adults with developmental disabilities. So this is monumental. This is, the first. We're in 2023, and we're building the first affordable housing community for people with developmental disabilities. And in the first phase of that, we're going to be able to house 50 to 60 adults. In the first phase, those individuals are individuals who will be able to live fairly independently. And then the second phase is for people who have more significant needs, who will need more support. But so good things are happening. We also have a few specialty clinics for adults for healthcare now in South Florida. So that's also relatively new. But we don't have sufficient support beyond, the adult years. So when we move into geriatric years, it's very, very challenging, I think, still. And then, of course, as you mentioned, parents die, siblings move away. The family that person once knew that supported him or her is maybe not there anymore. And so it's important for the community to step up and create these other kinds of opportunities, particularly around housing and healthcare. I think that's important. And we're very focused at CARD on employment. So we have an autism-friendly business initiative where we're partnering with local businesses and also local municipalities to make those communities and businesses more autism-friendly, but also to inspire the creation of jobs. Because if you can meaningfully engage someone in employment, you can turn them into a wage earner and a taxpayer. And then they're contributing in a way that also funnels money into the system that allows some of these other things to be built and created for our community.
Awesome. Any other questions from the students? All right, good job. So Mike, we turn it around and we hand it over to you. You get to ask me questions or them questions, whatever. 2 questions, anything you got for me, for us, for the group.
Wow, okay.
Sure, you're the host for the next couple
Yeah,
minutes.
that's great. That's a curveball I wasn't expecting, but I like it. Well, I guess for you, I mean, the thing that's always intrigued me about you, and I've never asked you, is what inspired you to come visit us when we opened our center? Like, what was your motivating factor in trying to understand who we were and what we were bringing to Miami Lakes? Like, because you were the only one initially that expressed any interest in what we were doing, and I never really thought about it, but why?
So two major reasons. At my dinner table every day, this was talked about. So my mom has run a unit for vocational rehab for the last 43 years. She still works here. She's still the director of one of the units. So people, adults, kids with disabilities was talked about at my dinner table. My dad ran a mental health crisis unit for 30 plus years. So on both sides. So being empathetic to the plight of others who really can't defend themselves was something that my parents ingrained in me every single day. And then secondly, I owned an adult daycare before I owned the restaurant. And at the adult daycare, it was mainly seniors, right? Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, different unfortunate diseases that folks were dealing with. But we also opened our doors to adults with disabilities. We realized that, and this was in 2012, 13, we realized that people weren't, especially adults past 21, some of them were just at home. So we got a call one day from a young man who he had cerebral palsy, and he lived in Little Havana. But they had nowhere to put him, and his parents went to different centers. Nobody would take him. And we were like, I talked to my partner, I was like, we need to do it. I mean, we need to, this is helping. It's just not about making money. It's help. Yeah, we'll make money, but we got to help. But he lived in Little Havana. So I remember, I was already the vice mayor at the time. I remember waking up at 4:30 in the morning, driving the huge van. This is a wheelchair lift, everything, picking him up in the mornings in Little Havana and just seeing how happy he was. And I was like, and I remember him coming to the center and him just participating with the seniors and painting and just dancing. And I'm like, man, like, we don't even know him. We don't even know his family, but he's so happy here. You know what I mean? So those are things that were ingrained in me, the plight of others. And then I remember campaigning and just hearing it over and over in our community, folks needed more service. So the moment I heard UMNSU card was opening up in Miami Lakes, I was like, we got to do something. We need to go see them. We need to partner with them. We need to meet them. And yeah, remember that meeting, and the commitment was, hey, when I'm mayor, I'm committed to doing a gala every year, to creating a special needs committee, to fund it. And like this year, we broke the record. We raised $32,000 for. But that was the why, that journey. And when I saw that, I was like, look, God gives us certain platforms in life, and we have to share with others. And I think that was one of them, the plight of people who nobody else.
It's so great. And I visited once with you after we knew each other for a while to the day center. And you've done so much since, so I'm just so grateful. I mean, the Special Needs Advisory and the Mayor's Gala and all the other partnerships. You've even employed at the cafe some of our guys. And then, of course, your support of the Hope for Autism team, which is very big in our community here. But for the students, what I would like to know, and this is always sometimes a challenging question for me, but we professionals who are in the field for decades often pat ourselves on the back because we say that our schools are more inclusive, young people know more about autism and disabilities than they ever did. And then yet I meet a bunch of students who tell me, I never really had a person with autism in my class, or maybe my school didn't have a best buddies or some kind of opportunity for us to interact with people with disabilities in the school. So I want to know, have you had those experiences that have shaped your understanding and appreciation and awareness and acceptance of people with various disabilities?
Laz, I know you had your hand up, but then anybody else that wanted to say a few words? Laz, you were going to say something? Or?
Yeah, I had two different types of experiences when it comes to that. My first high school had 4 in the entire school. And they were all very protected, cared for, everyone knew them and stuff like that. And then this other school I went to, there was just so many of the HML. There's a whole floor kind of dedicated to them. And so I remember it was like shell shock when I first got to the school, because like I was leaving school one day, and I guess that's when they have the aftercare, and I'm leaving, and they all like turned to me in unison. I was like, whoa. It was a really shocking moment. And one of them, like I had him in middle school, and then he ended up coming to high school with me, and we were his friends. Like he would eat lunch with us. Like we all loved him. His name was Esteban.
I love that. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think just being open to, because our kids, even in school, even when there are opportunities to meet the neurotypical population, often feel really isolated. And the idea of, I'm also I'm very public about this in all my talks, but I want kids, when they're in school, to really be integrated. Even if they're in special classrooms, those special classrooms should be in the same hallway as the grade level of the neurotypical kids, not all the special ed kids in a certain corridor of the school. And Jose Dotris, who's the superintendent of schools, he used to be the principal of Hialeah Gardens, and he and I go way back. And he always tells this story about how the first time he met me, I encouraged him to really look at the design of his school and not just have a wing, of the school for kids with special needs, but to integrate them in their grade levels throughout the school. And he even recently has told that story, and I think it's an important lesson for students to understand and even demand more inclusion of your special needs peers, and then also for the administrators to understand that as well.
So I teach right now 2 kids that have autism. One of them feels like in the middle of class will get up, and then she'll kind of walk with her headphones to the back of the classroom and everything. Now, in order to, I guess, kind of, I wouldn't say deal with it, but in order to, I guess, work with her, I kind of just let her do her thing, and because I feel like if I stop her, then there might be an issue. I'm not really sure. So, I mean, how is the best way to kind of...
I think what you're doing, it's totally respectful. Like, we all have our different ways of regulating ourselves throughout the day, right? Like, I'm a horrific nail biter and also a knee shaker. Like, all day long, you'll see me biting my nails and shaking my knee, but no one tries to stop me, right? But if someone with autism or any disability, or even just a neurotypical person who needs a break, wants to get up from their table, walk to the back of the room, have a moment, and then come back, most of the times, those kids are just going to come right back after they have an opportunity to just decompress a little bit and then re-regulate. So I'd say do exactly what you're doing. Now, if there's a child leaving the classroom, or what we call elopement, then that's obviously not okay. But you want to be respectful of what every individual needs to stay regulated in their learning. And if stepping away for a minute is what that student needs, as long as she's coming back or he's coming back, that's perfect. Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, kids with special needs have what we call IEPs, individual education plans, and sometimes we'll write into the IEP that the child's allowed to take breaks throughout the day. And those breaks could look like just stepping away from the desk, or they can be going for a walk down the hallway, depending on what level of functioning the child has. So yeah, I think what you're doing is perfect. You're not demanding compliance with a certain expectation of how a student should behave. You're expecting her differences, her uniqueness.
So Doc, we'll have some time afterwards to talk a little bit more, but in closing, what advice, inspiration, motivation, just tips would you give that 17-year-old Mike Alessandri that you wish you would have known then that you know today? Just some words, anything else you want to add, but specifically that words, motivate, inspiration, tips, advice.
I think I certainly didn't know in my generation the beauty that comes from different forms of humanity. Different forms of the human presentation actually make the world, a better place, particularly in the context of disability. And so I wish I had known something more leading up to that moment with Marlon. I was lucky enough to feel something very special. But I guess the other thing I would tell, and I tell my students at UM all the time, is try to be aware of when you're feeling something you haven't felt before, because that's a lesson to you about maybe something you should be doing or not doing or pursuing. And sometimes we just march through life not really mindful or cognizant of what we're feeling. We're focused on what we're doing. And I think there are just these moments these aha moments in life that if you're not attending to them, you can miss an opportunity like I had with Marlon. I mean, mine was such a monumentally powerful emotional experience that I don't think I could have missed it. But I could also see another student my age in that moment continue to stay on the path that he or she thought they were supposed to be on. and not follow the passion that was inspired in that moment. So, your parents may not like that advice, but there is something to be said for following your passion and following the feelings you're getting in certain experiences you're having in life, because I think they're really someone sending us a message, right, about what these moments mean in terms of the impact we can have on the world. So, and then just, embrace your blessings. We all have blessings. And sometimes we forget what those are. For me, it's the work that has defined who I am as a person, honestly. If you peel away my work, I'm not sure who I am. Which you don't have to peel it away because I'm just an old man now. It's all behind me. There are a few things ahead of me.
100%. And there you have it, the incredibly inspiring story behind Dr. Michael Alessandri. Tune in next Wednesday on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and X. We'll see you then.